Good afternoon, everybody. It's a privilege for me to be here and say a few words and talk about what is an incredibly important issue and what we're doing about it, and yes, to give you some ideas to make you feel safer. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to talk about bias-motivated crimes, what they are, how they're investigated, how we've trained our police officers in this county to deal with them, and also give you some examples of the cases we've had, and to leave you with what I believe is a very good feeling about how things are with criminal justice and law enforcement here in DuPage County. Hate crimes are different. They're different than any other type of crime because of the social cost to communities and to victims. Every single crime has a cost, right? We always hear about punishment, that it costs $30,000 a year to incarcerate an individual, but no one talks about the social cost of crime, the cost to society, and it's very hard to put a dollar value on that. But I can tell you this, when we see, great, thank you very much. Okay, perfect. Okay, so when we see hate crimes, we see not only victims who are traumatized and injured, but an entire community. And there's community-wide unrest because people don't feel safe. And it's a terrible feeling to live in your own house when you don't feel safe. So they are different, and as a result, we treat them very seriously. We have policies in place, and we've trained our police officers throughout the county on how to address them. So there's certain things that we look for in investigating these cases. We look for any type of offensive graffiti or other types of symbols that may have been used. The key is evidence of motive. It all comes down to what is the motive for the crime. And in looking at evidence of motive, we have this tool now that everyone has, the cell phone. Powerful evidence that we get from people's cell phones and social media, Facebook, texting. We will go in and get search warrants for people's accounts, and we can see what they've been posting when we try and prove a motive in a case. We look at, was the victim engaged in any activities which might have prompted someone to attack them? Did the crime occur around a major religious holiday? All of these are factors that the police are trained to look at. The Illinois hate crime statute, here's the key to this. It's the motive for the crime, but what's important to remember is the motive doesn't have to be the sole motive. In many of our cases are more than one motive. We may have a road rage incident, which starts out as an argument, and then all of a sudden, the offender will use a racial epithet and attack the victim. So what was the original motive? Well, it could be a dual motive. We only have to show that it was one of the motives involved. And that is by reason of somebody's perceived race, creed, color, religion, ancestry, sexual orientation, they commit a crime. What's important to know too is the victim does not have to be a member of the class. It's the perception of the offender. So if they believe the victim is a member of this class and commit a crime against them, and it turns out that the victim wasn't, it doesn't matter. We can still prove the case. All right, now there's been a number of constitutional arguments that have been made against the Illinois hate crime statute. And the biggest one is this, is that it punishes expression as opposed to conduct. That the hate crime statute is overbroad and has a chilling effect on free speech. But the courts have held that no, it doesn't punish expression, but it really punishes conduct. And that's the key, is someone who acts because of a particular reason. Another argument that was made by offenders is that the statute impermissibly makes speech an element of the crime. And the courts concluded that even without bigoted or racist speech, we can still prove a hate crime based on someone's actual actions. We don't actually need words to prove a particular crime. All right, this is what I mentioned earlier. The victim does not have to be a member of the protected class. It's the perception of the offender that's really important. As long as they believe the victim is in a particular class and that's why they committed the crime, we can prosecute that case as a hate crime. So the statute punishes conduct, not thought. And that's really the key. Anyone can have bigoted thoughts. That's not a crime. The crime is when the motive for their action is those bigoted thoughts. So what's the typical profile of a hate crime offender? Interestingly enough, only a small number of hate crimes are committed by organized groups. Most hate crimes are crimes of opportunity, and the typical offender is a male between the age of 18 and 24 with no prior record. They're neither impoverished or chronically unemployed. That's your typical hate crime offender. Generally, as I said earlier, they're divided into two categories. Okay, we have the predatory hate crimes, which fortunately we don't see a lot of in this county. Those are committed by multiple offenders who are going out looking for a particular victim. They've planned something, they're going to commit a biased crime. The second one is the opportunistic. And most of these have a dual motive. And again, the road rage is your classic example of that. Textbook indicators of hate crime, again, words, symbols, acts that may be offensive to a particular group. We look at what if the victim and the offender are members of a different racial or ethnic group, if the victim recently moved into a particular area where the crime took place, and whether or not the crime coincided with any particular holiday. Has the victim or the victim's group been involved in any recent public or political activities that would make them likely to be a target for a hate-motivated violence? And also if the offender belongs to a particular group and the manner of the commission of the crime. Also, all important factors that we look at when we decide whether a crime is motivated by bias and whether or not there's any other motivation. So again, the key is the offender's motivation and not the status of the victim. Here's our policy. Our policy on hate crimes is our attorneys have to reach out and personally meet with the victim anytime before we actually approve a hate crime. That has to be run by me. I have two phones, they're on 24/7. Fortunately, I can tell you this, in DuPage County, we do not see a lot of these, but they do happen. I'm going to talk about some of them. And every single plea offer in a hate crime case has to be approved by me, by the elected state's attorney. That's how seriously we treat these because of the impact that they have on the community. So what are the penalties for hate crime? Most hate crimes are class 4 felonies, which is actually the lower class felony. So if you have an aggravated battery where someone is beaten up as a result of a bias against that person, the aggravated battery is actually the higher class felony. But the hate crime is what the public is interested in. And the hate crime, we always, when they're going to plead guilty, we make them plead to the hate crime because that sends a very strong message to the community. Everyone knows what that is. And depending on whether or where the crime took place, that can also enhance the penalty. If it took place in a cemetery or in a school or a public park or a place of religious observance, an institution, a church, a mosque, a synagogue, the penalties are going to be enhanced. Also, when someone's convicted of a hate crime, There's a minimum 200 hours of community service. That's if they don't go to prison. And they must enroll in an educational program discouraging hate crimes. That was something that was recently added to the Illinois hate crime statute. I talked about some of the penalties for other offenses. Let me just run through quickly some of the cases that we've seen recently. This person right here, Ranferi Basila, was actually just sentenced a week ago. This occurred in Lombard. He was a store clerk in a 7-Eleven, and 3 African-American males and a Hispanic male walked into the store. He took a knife and he chased them out of the store, yelling racial epithets at them and slashed the tires on their car. He pled guilty to hate crime. There was no agreement on the sentencing, and the judge sentenced him to 2 years in the Department of Corrections, which I believe sends a very strong message that these crimes are not going to be tolerated. Just a few years ago, this was a juvenile case, so we can't put the juvenile's name here, but the victim in this case was a Sikh, and it was a road rage incident, and it escalated. And when it escalated, the juvenile started using racial epithets, and he was charged with a hate crime and aggravated battery, and pled guilty to the hate crime and was sentenced to probation in 15 days in juvenile detention, and also required to serve 200 hours of community service at the Sikh Community Center in Wheaton. There's another case, now this is a few years ago. This happened at Elmhurst College, and it was the dormitory of the only African-American resident advisor. And this is the offender, and he had scribbled some very disturbing epithets on the dormitory itself, including KKK and I hate black people. This was an actual trial, and he was found guilty of a hate crime and was sentenced to probation and community service. And finally, this is a case that's pending right now. We just charged this a few months ago. The victim in this case was an Uber driver, and she picked this person up at a bar about 2 in the morning. He had obviously been drinking, but he attacked her and yelled racial slurs at her and stated to her, "Just because you're Muslim, I'm going to kill you and snap your neck." And actually, many of the statements that he made were caught on the 911 call when she called the police. And this case is currently pending. So what I want to leave you with is this. Every month, all of the police chiefs in DuPage County have a monthly meeting, and I'm always there, or if I'm not there, somebody from my office is there. We have different committees. One of those committees is the Diversity Outreach Committee, and we have gone to mosques, synagogues, churches, and we have met with so many different groups in this county to let them know and reinforce that law enforcement is here to protect you, no matter who you are or where you're from. We are all Americans. We all live under the same law. The laws apply equally to everyone. And we really, we make an effort to go out there and let people know that. Because the other thing is, when crimes happen, we need people to cooperate. Otherwise, we can't make arrests and prosecute people without the faith of the community. And the criminal justice system is only as effective as the faith of the people who live in the community, because if the people lose faith in us, we can't do our job. And we've seen that happen in some of the metropolitan areas across this country. It is not the case here in DuPage County, I assure you of that. And everyone should feel safe, but the reality is this. No matter who you are or where you're from or where you live, you always have to be careful, and you always have to be aware of yourself and where you are, and keep an eye out, because that's just unfortunately the world that we live in. Anyone can be victimized, but there's certain things you can do to protect yourself from being a victim. But that's really what I want to stress to everyone is, in this county, everyone is treated the same, and the law applies equally to everyone, and we do take these cases seriously because of the effect that they have on the community. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
So what you have discussed is the crime itself. Like the guy has committed a crime, and that's what is done. So like recently there was in Naperville, there was a mobile gas station where the guy, he said something racial and all that, and luckily nothing happened, and then eventually he was fired. So my question is there any process in your department or other counties' department that those people who have shown the flair for being racial but have not committed any crime but can potentially commit a crime later on, is there a process to tag those guys, watch those guys, so before something bad really, really happens, that it can be controlled?
Sure. So anytime there's an incident where the police are called, even if there's not an arrest and no one is charged, there's going to be a report. And the police have intelligence, and they keep files on people, on certain people that that they should be aware of. Nothing illegal about it, but just so they know who these people are. Yes, that is a process. And obviously, without a sentence, without a judge forcing someone to do something, we can't force someone to go into an educational class, let's say. And let me just say this. In my opinion, from what I've seen, hate crimes are committed out of ignorance. It's because people are not educated. Most of the time.
Since I have been in United States, I found that there is a law and order in this country. There are many countries, they don't care for the law and order or for their citizens. My question is, many times I have seen on the TV, what is the role of media in propagating racial hatred? And I will give an example. Every television or radio station I heard, a white police officer killed the black guy. So why they have to use the white and the black rather than they should say the police officer killed somebody? So this is the media who is propagating and perpetuating the race. If there should be some kind of restriction or some kind of limit on what and how they utter the words.
Okay, so it's a great comment, all right? It really is. It's very complicated, obviously, but yes, the media sensationalizes. That's what they do. They want people to watch the news. They want people to read the papers and the magazines. All of this gets sensationalized, and that's how they portray it. Unfortunately, that's been going on for as long as time. And it's gotten worse, right? Every news station you watch is going to be opinionated one way or the other. And you never know what you're getting if it's really the truth. And there's no question that has fueled bias and hatred on different sides. And it's unfortunate. It really is. Very unfortunate. It's a great comment. Yeah.
In the last few months, we had one of the Hindu priests was beaten up by somebody who maybe claimed on the media maybe a white supremacist. So, our community then collected all the signatures to tell them to charge as a hate crime. So, and then about a couple of weeks ago, there was a hate crime on a Hindu priest in Queens, in New York. So I'm in the interfaith of New York City. I'm in the board. So the question I want to know is that what should the community do if one of their religious leader or teacher has been underwent through this hate crime incident? What should we be doing in this situation?
I think that if you're not getting the response from law enforcement and from the prosecutor, you need to demand a meeting with them.
Actually, it happened that initially the person who was charged in our area, New Jersey, initially police said that, this is just maybe not a hate crime. But then some of the people, our members, we suddenly brought our community together. Somebody put on the WhatsApp, everybody with the comment, and suddenly they say that they look at his Facebook and all those things and realize that he has some intention, yes. So then they are considering, I think people reach out to Attorney General of New Jersey also. Then they were investigated for hate crime.
And that's good. And you know what? That's how the process is supposed to work, right? If you raise your voice and you demand that they do something and they respond, in this case, there was a response, and they found additional evidence. You shouldn't have to do that. The police should be doing that automatically in these cases.
The same thing happened in Queens also. Initially, the police didn't charge this person with hate crime. But then the congresswoman got involved, then the governor of New York is involved, so they're investigating hate crime.
That shouldn't happen. And the reality is, look, the prosecutor is elected by the people, and the prosecutor is responsive to all the people. And that's what I tell everyone all the time. Look, if people don't like the job that I'm doing, they can vote me out of office, right? But it's important that all prosecutors I know, at least in this state, they will meet with you and they'll listen to you, and should consider what you say. And maybe they overlook something. I do it all the time. But it's important that your voice be heard, is the bottom line. And if you're not satisfied and you believe something was a hate crime, you have an obligation to go to the police and go to the prosecutor and try and convince them to do what's right, which is really what it's about. It's doing what's right.
Mr. Berlin, I have a question.
Sure.
I live on I'm sure other people have reported this person. This person for the last 8 or 9 years has had a sign there when Mr. Obama was the president. It had bullseye with his name, and I'm sure somebody has reported. And you drive past and it just seems to spew hatred. Yet he hasn't really committed any crime. It's supposedly free speech. Mm-hmm. What does one do, if anything?
In that situation, it's freedom of expression unless there's some act, there's some crime that's committed as a result. My advice is completely ignore it. Because when you ignore it, they don't get the response that they're looking for. And that's when people stop. And I know it's hard to do sometimes. Obviously, when there's conduct, it's an entirely different story. And then it cannot be ignored. It has to be pursued.
I just have one small question. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm also an Indian. So I look at things from both perspectives, particularly from the mental health perspective. A lot of times, I think I have a problem understanding of when a crime can actually be defined, because especially in terms of hate speech and the effect that it can have on a person is, do we have to prove physical harm in order to call it a crime? Because the way I look at it, everyone who suffers from PTSD, secondly, to being to a racial slur thrown at them, and this happens subtextually a lot. I speak a little different than how my parents speak, and we dress a little different. My parents moved here in their 50s, and I moved here at the age of 30. So we all can go into a restaurant together and be treated very differently, and come out and have people say things which at some point, I will turn around and be like, ignore. But think about a 16, 18, 12, 14-year-old who has these racial slurs thrown at him or is treated differently and then undergoes trauma, which probably he'll process in years and years of therapy. And I think it's a problem with the way the law is written that sometimes we can't think of it as a crime. I wondered what you thought about it.
Well, it's a great question. But you've got this constitutional argument, and you can't punish somebody's thoughts or freedom of expression. At what point does that expression become actual conduct? Now, to answer the first part of the question, you do not need physical injury. You can commit an assault. You know, puts someone in fear of receiving a battery. I'm going to punch you in the face because you are whatever. That's a hate crime. Okay? You've assaulted that person by reason of, you know, their religion, ancestry, ethnicity, whatever. Or it could be damage to property. You damage someone's vehicle because of who they are. But that's conduct. Calling someone a name without something more, it's disturbing. And yes, it's traumatic. Unfortunately, we have freedom of speech. And there's a very fine line there. But in a criminal case, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And those are going to, you know, oftentimes these are hard cases to prove because we have to discern what really is the motive. Is there a motive of bias in this crime? And absolutely. In many respects, it's worse. And that, you know, your point is that whether it's a crime or not, it has such an impact on people in the community. And that's why I believe that when we charge these cases, we publicize them. And because we do want to send a message that these cases are serious, they're going to be treated seriously, because we want the public to know there's consequences for this type of action. But at the end of the day, it's really about education. Education, it's everything. You know, yes, educated people still commit these crimes, but most of the time, it's ignorance. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.